Hello and welcome back to The Great Game. This is episode 38, and this is the second part of our two-part coverage of Gencon 2024. Huge thanks to Tony from the Dukes of Highland, again, for doing the legwork on this as our foreign correspondent over at Gencon. And if you haven't already listened to part one, rewind, check it out, episode 37. We've covered a bunch of mega games there and talked to a bunch of different people from Gencon. In this episode, we cover a lot more ground. We got Gods of the Ancient World, which you may have heard about on the pod before. Grimvale Ventures from Trenton, who we talked to a couple of episodes back. Goblin City, which I think we might have mentioned in that same episode with the Mega Game Coalition. And also It Belongs in a Museum, which is not the first time that we've talked about it on the podcast. Good episode, lots of interesting conversations with interesting people from the Mega Game world over at Gencon. So once again, thank you to Tony, and thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoy.
Hi, this is Tony from the Dukes of Highland and the Mega Game Coalition. We are a little bit after Gencon here. Gencon was crazy enough that we couldn't quite get all the interviews done in the event, but here we are. Today I'm with Forrest Corbett. Forrest, tell me who you are and what your associations are.
Well, you already said my name, so we'll skip that bit. But I'm a part of the Dukes of Highland, run by you, of course. And mostly I play or control mega games, and I help you with some testing and that kind of things when you need it. And I guess you could also say that I'm like an adjunct member of the Mega Game Coalition, having just run my first game for them at Gen Con this year.
Yeah, brilliant. Tell me your history of playing, controlling, and it sounds like this is the first run that you've done.
Yeah, definitely. I've played in 2 mega games total, and I've controlled in many, many more. I don't know if I have a count of them, but almost every one that the Dukes has put together, which is probably 8 or so at this point. And I've run one myself, so definitely prefer the controlling as opposed to playing, even though playing definitely has its bright spots. But the nice thing about mega games is whether you're controlling or playing, you always have fun and you have a unique experience. I think in a lot of ways control our players in a way, in the way you see the game and interact with it. So it's much closer to like a GM role than something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, Forrest is like one of my right-hand guys, has been, I think I dragged him to the very first one that we ran a few years ago, so he was one of the first batch of Dukes that I convinced to come along for the ride, and he's been with me ever since, and apparently enjoys it enough to start running, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Good stuff. Tell me, you were at Gen Con with us this year. What did you run?
Yeah, so I ran the game that you wrote, Gods of the Ancient World. It is probably my favorite mega game that I've ever been involved with.
Oh, stop.
Not to pat you on the back or anything like that.
I'll take it.
I just think it's so well balanced. There's something for everybody in it. Just to go into the elevator pitch of what the game is quickly. It's really a faction versus faction game, set in a semi-fictional world where the Greek and the Roman empires exist at the same time, and they battle for military and economic and political control of the Mediterranean, while the gods move in mysterious ways and mess with their game for good and for ill. So it's just a blast. There's hidden mechanics, and there's board game mechanics, role play, military maps, everything you could ever want out of a tabletop gaming experience.
Yeah, and so this is the third time it's been run. We ran it last year in Louisville in the summer, and then we ran it at Gen Con last year. And so this year I wasn't planning on running it, but Forrest showed an interest in running it, and so I've basically been super hands-off. Like, I handed over my stuff to him and said, here's the checklist of things that you need. have at it. So I was very hands off. And so tell me how the event went.
Oh, the event went about as good as I could have hoped for. I hope, at least from the feedback that I've seen, I think, regardless of it being the first game that I've run, I think it went really well. Controlled chaos, of course. It was pretty late at night, but the energy was still there. I mean, I think our last turn happened at like 10:45 p.m. After a full day of Gen Conning on top of that, and it was as chaotic and awesome even at that late at night. So I think it went really well. I had good feedback both on the during the game and after. So I thought it went great. Exhausting, of course. I was so tired at the end. I didn't realize just like how much more like the lead control role is compared to other roles, but you are everywhere all the time, all at once.
Yeah. Before the day, I was very hands off, and I wanted Forrest just to run with it, and he did obviously a fabulous job. Even before the event, my plan was to be there just to make sure things started smoothly, but I was so worn out after my game in the morning that I was like, I'm sorry, Forrest, you're on your own. And I just walked away. And I think you were okay with it, but I did, after a few hours, I did bring him a beer. Like, I just walked into the room holding a beer in a cup, and I gave it to him, and he seemed appreciative.
Ah, nectar of the gods. Yes.
So what lessons did you learn for the next game that you might run, whatever that might be?
Well, I'm not sure I learned this for like the next game, but just I guess for like anyone running a game for the first time, like find yourself a good mentor. I don't want to make this like the praise Tony show or anything, but
Oh, it's okay. You can. No.
okay,
Keep
well,
going.
yes. I It's so much work to run a mega game, and to have someone who has done it not just once but many times and wrote their own and knows the game so well, just to bounce questions off of, or I got this email from this player, how would you respond, what do you think of this, like find yourself a mentor that you can ask questions for. I think that was a big lesson learned, and just so valuable in running the game. I think the other lesson learned is there's no such thing as too much control. Um, we had 8 control plus me, and I honestly think even 1 or 2 wouldn't have been too many. There's always people who have questions, or if a control needs to take a break outside of like the standard break times, you have people who can jump in, that kind of thing. And then I think the other thing is, as it goes with control, is like really try to empower them to like make the game decisions themselves. I'm so grateful for the control that I had. Like after training them and answering their questions, like I could just say, that sounds interesting. Go answer that question. Go figure that out. Go work with this control and those players and figure out the answer. So I think those are the lessons, the big lessons that I learned is, mentor is huge. And then just the more you can invest in your control so that they can be as self-sufficient as possible, the better your game's going to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've definitely had control members before that kind of want to run everything by you, and to sort of invest in them and empower them to make those decisions without you being there is really important, because it gives them confidence. I think it gives more variety to the game. They interject things that you won't have thought of before. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I couldn't agree more.
I mean, some things you want them to run by you, like massive things.
Sure.
I mean, I'll give you an example. From this game, one of the regions in the Greek faction wanted to defect to the Roman side. Which is like a huge impact on the game. An entire region leaving their faction is massive, and so like that's the kind of thing that you want to run by your lead control, just so you can get all the ducks in the row to make sure that happens successfully and doesn't break the game. thankfully it happened on the last turn, so the consequences at the end are minimal, but you know, even having a control that knows the things that they need to run by you or get other control involved, or versus the small things that they can take care of themselves is huge.
And the lead control also can help with disseminating that information. They come to you with this big game-breaking play, and so getting their feedback is really important. But then that lead control can sort of spread that information around the other control members and say, here's something that's going to happen, and I want you to know that it's going to affect your team in XYZ ways. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So tell us some of the other great stories of the day. What obviously we're in spoiler territory here, but what did the players do that really had a big smile on your face?
Yeah. I have two things that I can really think of. One is one of the gods wanted to have an air loot off, like to have a representative from each side come up and do an air loot, which was just something so unique that we hadn't seen before. And the players got into it. And it was really high energy. People were cheering for their faction, so that was pretty awesome. And it was also cool to see like a god that I hadn't really interacted with most of the game. Just kind of show up with this great idea and just really, really pull it off. The prize that he gave at the end was awesome, and I think everyone really enjoyed it. And then I think the best moment for me was more of a smaller one, but we had one region that was like two dads and their kids, and maybe one of them was like the friend of their kids, but like two adults with much younger than we normally have playing the game, right? We're talking somewhere between like 10 and 13, like in that range, which is younger than I feel like you have most of the time at mega games. And one of the kids was playing a more role play heavy role. They were playing a governor role, and throughout the game they would ask me questions, and it seemed like they were confused. And I tried to give them as much direction as possible, but in Gods of the Ancient World, we give achievements at the end for like the groups that did the best at their specific role, right? There's something like 8 different roles in the game for each faction, and that table got like 2 of the 3, and that kid was the best governor that we had. And so it was really great for me to see like the kid start off kind of confused, but then like really take on the game and do really, really excellent at the end. I think that is the hallmark of a successful game, when you can get someone who's a little timid, little confused, but still asking questions and interested to like really own it at the end.
I think you probably made yourself a lifelong mega gamer there too.
I hope so. That whole table, I think, was having a good time.
Fantastic, yeah. So the next question is for you: how was a game at Gen Con based differently from the ones that we run locally, in your opinion?
I think there's 2 things. One is, at least from my perspective, and seeing as I haven't like coordinated a game outside of Gen Con, like the logistics seem a lot easier for like the average game runner. You kind of get a room and a time slot, and so that's not a place that you have to go find in your city. And the advertising is built in, so like those kind of like starting logistics are probably easier for the average game runner. I'm sure as one of the MGC council members, you're like, it is the exact opposite of that. Like,
no comment.
But yeah.
And what about the player base? How do the player base differ?
Yeah, I think you get a kind of a similar player base, like lots of new people for sure, and lots of people from a different areas of the country. Right, it's a much more diverse. Gen Con is a huge convention, so you really get people who are like may not even know what a mega game is going in, but they saw your description and thought it was a good time. And then you get people who play mega games every year at Gen Con, and just it is their favorite thing to do, and they have such the great energy. So like that dichotomy between seasoned vets and brand new people is really interesting. The one thing that I will say that's different in a challenging way is the amount of time that you have to like set up your game, run it, and take it down, is a lot shorter at Gen Con than it is when you
Absolutely.
run a game other
Yeah.
places. Like you have an hour to set up and then an hour to take down, really, because there's a game there before and maybe a game after, or it's midnight and you just want to go to bed already. So I think that time crunch can be a challenge, but from all the games that I saw that were run, it was a challenge well faced and well met.
Yeah, that's why I pick the morning slots. Because you can set up the night before if you need to, especially the first one of the con. It's very different. Anyway, so normally at this point we say, like, is it packaged? Well, the answer is yes. But what's the future of the game from your perspective? Do you think you'll run this again?
Will I run it again?
Yeah.
Too soon to say, right? I think that just like because of where I am in in the different groups that I'm in, you do a lot of the coordinating, and our group has experienced Gods of the Ancient World, so I go to Origins and I love conventions, so maybe it gets run there. I think that's a possibility. If how the future sees, we don't know, but I think it has a good chance of being run there. I think some people I talk to are interested in running the game other places, so you may get some calls for it. But I think one of the cool things about Gods of the Ancient World is because it doesn't have like a set plot, right? As long as you play a different role, or even if you play the same role, your experience is going to be different. So you could play it 3, 4, 5 times, and even though the general gameplay loops are going to be the same, your experience and what happens in the game is going to be completely different. And there's something to be said for knowing the game also, and that helping you have a better play experience in the future. So I don't think this is the end for Gods of the Ancient World by any means. It's an excellent game. It'll be run other places, whether it's by me or by others in the MGC. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I know for a fact it's been run down in Dallas. Those guys have done it. And who knows? I don't know where else it's going to be run yet, but it's available for purchase on the Dukes of Highland website. Normally, we talk now about like the future of the group, but we'll leave that for when I get interviewed. So I know that once upon a time you were thinking of your own design for Mega Games. What is the status of that? The people want to know, Forrest.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I pick up and play with every now and then. I think there's definitely a game in there somewhere. The general inspiration of it is based off of the Frostpunk video game, a players against the game kind of style. Mega game is really interesting to me, and so I've been working on that on and off. Every time I play or control a mega game, I get the itch again, and I pick it up and I work on it a little bit more. I would love to see it become a thing someday, and I hope I can make it a thing. But massive TBD on that. But.
Totally understand. Thank you so much for taking this time with us, and congratulations on the game one more time. It sounded like it went really, really well.
Thanks, I had fun.
Thanks, Forrest. Hello, this is Tony again with the Dukes of Highland. I'm here representing the MGC at Gencon 2024. Today we have Trenton with us. Trenton, tell us who you are and how you're associated with the MGC.
Yeah, so I am Trenton Greyoak. I got involved with the MGC actually way back when in 2018, and was pretty active pre-pandemic, and then post-pandemic I've been jumping back in, helping a bunch. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, and so tell me about the game. You ran yesterday morning, and I couldn't be there because I was playing a different game, so I was sad for that. But tell me about your game and how many times it's been run.
Yeah, so my game was called Grimvale Ventures, and this was the first full run. I did a couple like tiny play tests, but this was the first full run with 66 players and 7 moderators. And So Grimvale Ventures is so this new fantasy frontier has opened, and it is equally rich in resources as it is deadly with monsters and hazards and all that. And these merchant companies are like streaming in through the portal, but they're not themselves going and getting the resources. They're basically using the adventurers that want to go out there as their little hirelings, and so they're sending them on quests to bring back resources, new discoveries, that kind of thing. And then the companies are using those resources to turn them into merch and sell them right back to the hirelings. So it's very much a trade negotiation type of thing. There's 12 different companies, all kind of, there's a lot of cooperation, there's a lot of competition, that kind of thing. There are over 3,000 sleeved cards, which is too many, and I'm insane. And just a whole bunch of other components.
So the core gameplay loop, it sounds like you're sending these adventurers out and they do stuff and then they bring stuff back. Are these adventurers people or are they cards? How does that work?
Yes, so the adventures are just cards. So almost all the players are just executives at these different companies. There's 3 for the kind of the loose government team, and then 3 bards who are posting headlines that get displayed on all the different TVs. And then the government is kind of like helping different companies that might fall behind, that kind of thing. They were kind of an experimental role, like they're almost like moderator light kind of thing. Like they had their own goals, but like one of the primary goals was to identify struggling companies so that they could kind of come in and help them, and they were looking for relics too, which struggling companies tended to have more of just because of certain things I put in there. But yeah, so within the companies themselves, the executives, there's a lot to the game, but there's a lot of like card drafts, like trying to get the cards that you need. You're not always going to get the cards that you need, so you're going to spend a lot of time negotiating with other companies. It's designed from the ground up to be moderator light. Honestly, it's like the first 2 turns I needed more moderators, and the rest of the game I probably needed fewer moderators. Like after the players know everything, like know how things work, they can basically do a huge part of the game themselves. So I don't know quite how to solve that like initial teach that you kind of need a lot of moderators, but I'm gonna think about that.
Yeah, it's a problem we all face. Every mega game runner has to work out how many moderators is the perfect quantity, and I don't think any of us know. You run it a lot and you find out from experience is the only way, so it's challenging, certainly. What Trenton, I don't think, told us is that he is the designer of Deephaven. I always think Gloomhaven, but we play Gloomhaven a lot, so I get confused. Deephaven, of course, I run Deephaven myself. He has been on podcasts talking about that in the past. How is this different from Deephaven?
So Deephaven had a lot going on, but it was definitely more narrative. Like it was, I always said it was a mega story game. It was that there's a lot of mechanics still in there, but it's all supporting the narrative. Grimvale, in some ways, was kind of I don't want to say knee-jerk reaction, but it's sort of like me traveling to the other end of the spectrum. And it's way, way, way more mechanical. There's a lot more things, a lot more components to balance, and how they interact took a long time. The other thing that I've learned with this game is I hit the boundary of where I want to go in terms of the prep and all the materials and stuff. So if my next mega game will probably go to the other end of the spectrum, like I want to just like get a trash bag full of some loose components and pile it on a table. That sounds way better to me next time.
I know exactly how you feel because we just ran It Belongs to the Museum, and I know how you feel completely. Tell me how the event went. Tell me about the event specifically and how it went.
So it went actually really well, which in some ways made all the hard work worth it. It had the same kind of things a lot of mega games have. Like it takes a little bit for the players to kind of bring up to speed. This is the first run, so there's definitely some things I identified to improve. Some different confusion points and stuff. and I tried my best to train my moderators, but it was a new game. There's a lot of things that I think I could get better at explaining, better teaching materials, that kind of thing. But wow, like it for how much stuff there was, how much stuff was going on. I'm really happy with how it went, and I've really enjoyed all the players coming up to me and like being so jazzed about it. And I'm not gonna lie, like Riley at the end there, like kind of did a call out, like identifying how insane I am for all the components, and that's probably the first time I've really cried in front of that many people. So that was a nice moment.
That's amazing. I have definitely cried when being thanked for Mega Games 2, because that's why we do it. We do it for the people and the joy of players. Tell me some of the best stories of the day. Spoiler warning, but tell me some of the best stories, please.
I was so impressed with some of the companies and how they really took to the game, and it's kind of, you think of it as a really competitive game, all these companies and stuff, but it's actually, a lot of the mechanics are kind of surprisingly cooperative. Like you really need other companies to help you with your goals, and you help them with theirs. And I was just like, this is sort of a general thing, but I was just so impressed with how many players like were able to coordinate different things. Like they didn't have the hireling they need, they didn't have the resources they need, and it was just so great to like just kind of sit back and like see all of these people like figuring out all of these different problems. I'd say like the finale actually went really well. I won't go into too many details, but like I was also impressed with how many companies like contributed. There's a little bit of kind of a game theory thing at the end there, where if you don't help everybody, you might benefit from it if things go at least not too poorly. But yeah, the government team like did a great job like getting everyone on the same side. They did so well that the calculation to like determine like the epilogue, like one of those things is like there's a bunch of epilogues for the different roles and that kind of thing. And they did so well that it just like, I had loose calculations on where they were going to be initially, and this game like they just blew through the roof and like did the best possible thing. I was impressed with that.
That sounds great. Epilogue's always challenging, and I'm glad it went really well. So tell me about the future of the game. Are you going to run it again? Is it packaged?
Is it packaged? It's in multiple suitcases. Does that count? Yeah, I kind of have to run it again just because like all of the work that I put into. I think my wife would just divorce me if I did not run it a couple more times to make all, because she helped. Shout out to her, like she helped, especially the last few weeks. Like she did so much of the layout and all of the graphic design and just every other little thing. Like she did so much. Like I would not have been able to do anything without her. So props to her. I also had a bunch of people come over and help me sleeve. Like my mother and father-in-law were over. They don't play Mega games, but they were doing great sleeving all of these cards for me.
So when are you running it again?
I don't know. Like for all these Mega games that I help with, like I've never actually run one in Minnesota where I'm from, and I know there's a lot of people out there interested. We even have some people like in Fargo, like Jed and them, like that have done Mega games, and so I think it's probably time to start planning those and trying to get people to trying to jumpstart that community out there. So I'm not going to answer the question. I don't know when.
Okay, final words of wisdom from Trent. What's it going to be?
I kind of want to just be a cautionary tale to over engineering the game and over prepping, and just like I think there's something to be said about Mega games being a little bit more rough here and there, and not everything has to be perfect, and it's definitely not good for your mental health to try to make everything perfect. And I think I experienced that pretty hard. Like I think this was the hardest, probably the hardest thing I ever did. Like for how much time leading up to it that I put into it, and how difficult so much of it was. I guess that makes me a pretty lucky person that making a Mega game is the hardest thing. But I'm proud that I got there. I'm so thankful to Deanna, my wife, that she helped me so much. And I'd say keep keep track of your mental health when you're making mega games, and make sure you're doing all right. Yeah, that's my words of wisdom.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Trent. I really appreciate it. Hi, this is Tony from the Dukes of Highland and the Mega Game Coalition. We are a little bit after Gen Con at this point, but today I am here with Scott. Scott, why don't you tell me who you are and what your associations are in the Mega Game world?
Hey, my name is Scott McMahon. I'm used to be associated with West Coast Mega Games. Rest in peace, West Coast Mega Games.
Rip.
So I guess now I'm just like a free rogue Mega Game agent, doing my own thing. I ran Goblin City with the Mega Game Coalition this year. It was my first official in-person Mega Game. Although before that, I've run quite a few things online. I created a program called CANDI, which is used to run basically most of the play-by-email games run by the Omega server on Discord. So I'm fairly familiar with Mega games and play-by-email games, but this is my first official in-person game. So I'm officially now made it as a Mega game producer.
Massive congratulations, of course. The first is always the hardest. And if anyone has been playing anything via Omega, Scott's handle is Bob the Ninja Man. So in case you've seen that before, this is who Scott is.
Yeah, that's me.
So tell us what your history of playing in-person games and running them and controlling them. What's your history?
Yeah. So there's this little known video by this YouTube channel that I don't think anybody's heard of called Shut Up and Sit Down, where they do a mega game. And I watched it and I was like, oh, that's amazing. I need to do that. And so I looked it up and it turns out West Coast Mega Games was running a game nearby me. And they ran Sengoku up in Sacramento. So I, drove up. I live in the Bay Area. So I drove up there, got a bunch of my friends and my brother together, and we did a Sengoku, and it was quite a bit of fun. It's like you never forget your first mega game of just like wow, there's a lot of people in here and they're all doing the same thing.
What year was this?
And then, oh man, I don't even remember. This is probably like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Time is not my strong point. But ever since then, anytime I can go to a mega game, I've been trying to do that. I think the first time I hooked up with the MGC was I went to Shucks one year, and I helped run basically every single mega game we ran. I was up party to and helping run, and then from there is just anytime there's a mega game happening, whether online or in person that I can actually physically go to, I try to make it to.
In the MGC and at Gen Con specifically, we have put a limit on the number of games that people are allowed to help with, and the limit is 4 because we feel like any more than that is just exhausting and crazy. But Scott is one of the few who are like, I just need to do more. Just let me do more. Like, no, Scott.
Yeah.
No.
I think this year it was because I was running my first game ever. I basically usually the months leading up to the con, I'm like researching each game and prepping for it. But this year I spent so much time doing my own thing and because I didn't work. I was working on Goblin City up until like the last possible minute of me leaving the house to go to the airport. I was printing stuff and tweaking stuff. So I a lot of my energy was towards that. But if I wasn't running a game, absolutely I'd be showing up to every single mega game being like, hey, you need help? Put me in, coach.
Well, I can tell you, we definitely appreciate it. And there's lots of organizers that are like, boy, is Scott around? We could really use an extra pair of hands right now. And you just been around the block a few times, and you just know how things are supposed to run. So this is your first that you were leading. Again, congratulations. And it was the first time you had run this one. So tell us a little bit about Goblin City. Give us the elevator pitch and some of the core gameplay loops.
So it started off as a play-by-email game that I ran a couple years back. That went pretty okay in my opinion. Everybody had fun, but the goal behind that was all the play-by-email games were fairly serious they have like a big structured plot and characters with backgrounds, and there's a big finale. And I wanted to like not do that. I wanted to just have a play by email game that was just silly and fun and dumb, that you didn't have to stress about. You were eager to message people because silly things were happening. Didn't really succeed on that front. I still ended up falling for a lot of pitfalls of like major plots and stuff. But I always thought like this would be as much as I like play by email games, I think I prefer in-person mega games. So I decided last Gen Con, I was talking with Riley. I'm like, this would be, I could really turn this game into an actual mega game. And so that's basically, I spent the whole entire last year working on that and converting it. Um, so that's the basic idea behind Goblin City, is that is an unserious, very silly mega game. The idea trying to yes and players as much as possible, trying to dump fuel on their weird ideas that they always come up with, and just pure shenanigans of goblins doing chaotic goblin things, and then dealing with consequences. And I think it did pretty well in that aspect. I don't know if there's a lot of other mega games that are setting out with the intent of being silly and dumb. So I think I get props in that category. But
So what does a player do on their turn? Question mark. Do you have turns? What
yeah,
does the game look like?
So like this game got play tested quite a few times online, and originally I did not have any rounds or turns. The game just started and you were going. And players really didn't like that. I don't get it. Apparently they need turn structure to feel like it's an actual game and not get overwhelmed. But every round you are doing actions. They're just free form actions with a slip. There's like 3 questions that you have to answer. What are you doing? How are you able to achieve it? And then what do you want to gain from this action? That helps inform like what the action actually is. And then you have to get a bunch of your colleagues together, whether they're on your team or other teams. You have to get a bunch of goblins together, and you have to contribute a bunch of assets. The assets have dice and dice type. And then once you're ready, you go to controller, you pitch your idea. The controller looks over everything and says, yeah, you can do that. Or they make a suggestion for something else you need to grab. And then you roll some dice and see what happens. By definition, the actions basically are guaranteed to happen as long as the controller signs off on it. Rolling of the dice is more of a to see what consequences happen as a result of an action succeeding, rather than like, does it actually happen or not? And then based on the consequences, players can get injuries. They can have complications spawn, which is like some sort of monster wanders into the city and is now just rifling through their stuff. And then after that, it basically the entire game is doing freeform actions. There is also a resource subgame where each team has needs they have to meet. And these are just resource goals that they have to get. And once they get them, they get a reward, which is just another asset. Sometimes it's a legacy point. But basically, you're either doing actions, gathering people to do your schemes and progressing your own goals or your team goals, or you're going around trying to trade for what you need and giving, because every team also produces a lot of one type of resource. So there's like a mini resource trading game, which is basically I'm tricking players into going and talking to each other and giving them a reason to like break the ice. That isn't just like walking up to someone and trying to like introduce yourself. You could go up and be like, hey, I've got 5 excellent moss. Do you have any shiny rocks that you want to trade?
That sounds like perfect goblin trading to me.
Yeah, the resources are also very silly. There's neat junk, excellent moss, shiny rocks, weird bugs, sharp fangs, stuff like that.
Let me ask, this sounds like it draws some influence from things like NSDM and Deep Haven. Tell me the differences. What's the difference between your game and those?
So I usually describe it as it's Deep Haven, Sickle, which is one of Riley's games, and NSDM. I throw them in a blender and add some of my own secret ingredients and recipes, and that's what Goblin City is. It's very much, I like the mega games of just freeform actions where it's very open to players doing stuff, which is kind of like the whole entire NSDM style, is that you're just writing stuff on a piece of paper and getting people to sign that piece of paper. But I also like having a little bit more mechanics. That's the idea behind the resource game, was primarily just to get players talking to each other and trading each other. But then also I can use those resources, like players have special abilities, like they can heal injuries, they can upgrade assets, but those also cost resources. So I can take those mechanics and actually like turn them into gameplay stuff where like you can heal that injury, but there's an actual cost to it. And then yeah, that's the resource trading. So I do like having a little bit more mechanics than like a traditional NSDM game.
Brilliant.
But yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us about how the event itself went.
The event went pretty good. I walked in expecting it was going to be a total train wreck. Everybody was going to hate it, and that would be run out of town on a rail. But that didn't happen. So obviously, it went better than I thought it would. Everybody basically had fun. The game, there's some bumps in explaining the rules, and like I got lots of feedback that's actionable that I'm going to change for next year. But for the vast majority of the time, everybody had fun. Everybody was going around doing goblin things. I had to tell several factions that, like, yes, you can keep fighting each other, and yes, you can make a bomb that looks like a magical, like you can make a magic bomb that looks like a science explosion to frame the science people, but that's probably not a good recipe for long-term happiness. But yeah, players had a lot of fun.
Brilliant. That's great news. You've already hinted that you'll bring it back next year, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But
Mhm.
what's your favourite story of the day? What sort of shenanigans did the players get up to?
Uh, there's a lot of things that I wasn't party to because I was just so busy running around being the
Naturally.
game runner. But so one of the things that happens as a result of an action is you get these injuries, and the intent behind the injuries is like player death isn't actually a thing in the Goblin City. It will be in the future, but it'll be a funny thing in the future. I don't want to spoil it too much, but basically you get an injury, and the injury would say, okay, you now have third person syndrome. For the rest of the game, as long as you have this injury, you must refer to your character in the third person. And all the injuries are along the lines of that, where they're just silly role-playing things that the player must do, and it's completely optional. A lot of times, players like there was one where you had to insert the word goblin into every other sentence, and the player's like, "Yeah, that was fun for about one round, but then it got really old, so I stopped doing it." So that we have these injuries that to kind of like add something to the game and let players give them an excuse basically to role play more as goblins, in my opinion. But one of the injuries was called Lonely Heart, which is you are not allowed to do any actions until you find someone to agree to marry you. And then you had to find a player who is a religious player. There's like multiple faiths in the game, and you had to find them to officiate the wedding. So we had at least 2 weddings happen over the course of the game where like players got married, quote unquote, and it was very fun, very enjoyable. There is a food cooking contest that happened where like one of the factions declared that they were going to be the best chefs in the game, and if anybody wanted to challenge them, they'd have a cooking contest over in the corner. I'm very sad I missed that because I was doing major plot things, but that is
This wasn't a
much.
major plot.
No, it wasn't, and that's like one of the things that I always seem to fall into the trap of having a major plot that kind of takes over the game. When in reality, I was over there like, oh, there's a dragon, he's showing up, and you're fighting the dragon, and the entire time I was just looking over in the other side of the room while there's this cooking contest happening. And like that's what I want to be doing, not on this silly dragon stuff. I want to be having cooking contests.
Yeah, it's a really interesting balance. Catering the big plot ideas that you are that you have put a lot of thought into that are going to make some great moments elsewhere, and all the silly things that the players come up with, because there are some players that really like doing those silly little plots, like
Yes.
the cooking. But then there's some that really like, oh, there's a big dragon. How are we going to solve that problem? So it's a
Yeah.
challenge.
And there's definitely like as much as I wish I was doing the other thing, a lot of players enjoy the main plot line that we came up with. I do have some I think I set like one of the factions they were kobold cultists. And I will say I don't deserve the players I got for this game. The players were fantastic. I played in a lot of games, and like the quality of the players in this game were great. 10 out of 10. I rank my players 10. So these players, it was made clear that like, okay, the dragon's going to eventually come up to the city and he's going to try and take over because that's what dragons do. And you are all cultists who worship the dragon, but that's not necessarily like you have to worship the dragon. You could show up to the city and be like, you know what? We don't want to, like, the dragon basically owns us because he's a dragon and we're kobolds, he views us as property. You have the opportunity of like trying to subvert the dragon and like break free of him eventually. And I told my controller, like, make this clear that this is an option that they have so they don't have to be the bad guys of the game. And the players did not even for a second consider it. They're like, all hail Flickerwick the dragon. We worship their mighty scales, and they went hard on being in favor of the dragon and trying to spread their influence. Which I thought was great. That's like exactly the energy you want from players. But when you have it like that the dragon was basically not going to win. Not that I have it written, but it's like you have 7 dragon players versus the other 30 players who don't want the dragon to win. The numbers don't really add up for the dragon team. So I feel like I did set them up for failure there, and I will be changing how I do things in the future.
So I think if the expectation is there that they're not going to win, I think that's totally okay. Like I don't mind playing an antagonist role, and I recognize that I'm usually in the minority, but I have a lot of fun with that, and I don't and those antagonists are driving the story for so many other people, and I think that is that's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. So the big thing that really makes it clear, like the big lesson I learned was that because I had the cultists, they were my like wild card faction. They didn't have any kind of resource needs. Every round during the team phase, they had basically a magical Zoom call with the dragon. The dragon had specific things that they were looking for, like dwarven artifacts, elvish books, gold, dragon eggs. Basically, like the dragon had things on his wish list that the kobolds were supposed to acquire for him. And so that's what they were doing during their team phases. They were doing that. The other wildcard faction was a surface delegation. There's a bunch of humans and elves and whatnot visiting the city, and they're trying to build relations with the goblins and establish an embassy. And they did not have any kind of antagonistic element to their faction. They're literally there as archaeologists. They're supposed to find an example of like goblin art, goblin poetry, goblin cooking, etc. And the feedback I got from the surface delegation was that like they had a lot of fun just collaborating with these goblin players and like building something, and it was a lot more wholesome from their point of view. Where the kobolds, they had like, and they're very antagonistic. At some point, players were building anti-kobold mind control devices so that if a kobold walked around, they would like know that there's a kobold player at their table. The surface delegation, they were building embassies, and they got a core of engineers that were going around and building things for them. And I feel like that is the heart of Goblin City that I was really trying to go for, is that I'm trying to foster an environment where players are collaborating and yes-anding each other and building something for the future. Because this is a legacy game. I have a lot of legacy mechanics baked into this. So that like in the future runs, I'm going to have it much more focused on that, on the collaborative side of things, rather than like you are the bad guy faction and you're here to burn things down and whatnot. But I will still have that in there. Like, and it's just, you always got to have an antagonist somewhere in the game. But
I feel like you could do an entire podcast on legacy implementation in these games. It's not something we've got time for today, but you've hinted at there might be changes to the next time you run it because you're thinking about the legacy elements. Is it a spoiler to tell us about some of the changes?
No. In fact, I really do want to talk about some of the things. So basically, as you went through the gains deck, or the needs deck, you got certain cards that were legacy cards. And then at the end of the game, I have a designated time where we sit down and I handed out this form for every team to fill out. And it was basically for every legacy point you get, you can change one thing about your faction. So you either can add a new goal for your faction, or you can drop an existing goal that the faction has, or you can bequeath some sort of asset to the next generation. And you'd put it in I had a little envelope for them. They fill out the form and put it in, and they submitted them. And so now I went through and I changed every single faction. They had their goals updated and removed. A lot of the factions had goals like, you don't like this spider goblins because they're science and you're magic, and you don't get along well. And players seem to really respond to this. That the idea that like the stuff that they were doing during the game is going to affect future runs of the game, and each successive run of Goblin City is going to inherit these new goals from the previous factions. And I think the really inspiring thing for me was that every single faction that started off with some sort of bias, where there's like, oh, you don't like that faction, or like you don't like them, every single one voted to remove the negative goals. All of them were like, yes, let's build bridges, let's let the past be the past, and let's like move forward with new stuff. And I thought that was really great. I think that's like says a lot about the goodness of people. But then also on the other side of the coin, you had one faction that's like, yeah, we want to make a new race of sentient lobsters. That's our goal for this entire game. Is we're going to take our little lobsters that are just basic lobsters. We're going to send them to college. We're going to teach them how to play dodgeball, because that's a requirement for sentience. We're going to like train them up and make them their own new faction. And that happened. So now there's a brand new faction that's going to be in the game for that sentient lobsters. That's just
gosh.
because one team decided that that's what they were going to work on. And
That's so good. Do you think those guys were just trolling you?
No, they were 100% serious, and that's like what I wanted from this game, because like every single mega game, players always come up with these weird shenanigans that you can't predict, that always ends up being a very memorable thing where you're like, oh, that was great. I can't believe that they just came up with that in the room without me prompting them. And the nice thing about my whole legacy thing is that I am now harnessing that, and I'm like tricking the players into making my game
Writing
better
content
during the
for
long
you.
run. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now, now
Bravo,
I have this
bravo.
cool faction that has an origin that, like, when players get here, they're going to be like, oh, this is like something that another team did last run. Is like, now you have this faction. If you want to do something similar, that's like you're playing this faction, so you know for a fact that what you do now can carry over in the future. So feel free to like swing for the fences.
Yeah, that's amazing. Congratulations. I mean, that's just such a great concept. I think you've really come up with something new that I've never heard before. So that's really good. Scott, I would love to know. It sounds like you've got ideas for running it next year at Gencon. Do you think it'll be run between now and then? And can anyone else get their hands on this that maybe isn't going to Gencon next time?
Yeah, I've had quite a few people asking me if I'm going to run it before Gen Con. At the very least, it's going to run. If I'm going to Gen Con, I'm going to try and run it at Gen Con every single year. I also plan on compiling a list of past players. So if there's a player who wants to return and play the game again, I'll have some tickets on reserve for those players. So if you ever want to come back,
Wow.
I'd love to have returning players. But this game was play tested online. I modified my program CANDI to run it online, and so I'm seriously thinking about running it again online. And I don't know when or where, and I'm still looking at the code and trying to think about it, because there's still work to be done. But I'd love to run this again sometime.
Brilliant.
Before next year.
That's amazing. One last question. You said you're part of Omega. What else has Omega got going on over the next 6 months or so?
I'm fairly ignorant of the schedule, but they're always planning and running play-by-email games. That's the main focus of like the players and the council running the Omega scene. So if you have an interest in playing a play-by-email game, I highly recommend trying them out. They're like 6 to 8 weeks of sending emails, getting invested in characters, and like finding plots and doing actions. It's very interesting and very rewarding if you like, that's your kind of thing. So if you go on the Mega server, they have like announcements. I think they're getting ready to announce their next batch of games. And of course, if any time I'm running Goblin City or any of my other projects in the future, I'll be advertising them on the Omega server and the MGC server if I can. So definitely go check them out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your time. Congratulations again on Goblin City, and looking forward to hearing the shenanigans with the next legacy elements.
Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Forrest, and I will be interviewing Tony Doherty. He ran It Belongs in a Museum at Gencon this year. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tony.
Hello again, Forrest. Yes, my name's Tony. I'm with the Dukes of Highland. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky, in the US. And I am on the Mega Game Coalition Council, which is just some fancy terminology for one of the guys that keeps the lights on at the MGC.
Excellent. All right, give us the quick intro to you, how long you've been playing, controlling, running, and writing mega games. A man of many hats.
Yes, most of this, I'm not going to go into too many details because we've already talked about this in the last segment, but since we've been running the Duke since 2022, and we've run almost a dozen games between then and now. So we've got one more left this year.
Excellent. All right, so the main topic today is It Belongs in a Museum, which is just one hell of a mega game. Give us the 30-second elevator pitch for It Belongs in a Museum.
It Belongs in a Museum is just a fabulous theme, and it is the theme of Indiana Jones and Lara Croft and The Mummy and all these amazing sort of adventure stories like Tintin, and they've just pulled from popular culture all over the place, and they've smashed them together in this 1930s game of exploration. The core gameplay loops start with the museum teams. They run museums all around the world, and they are rich. They provide adventure briefings to adventurers. The adventurers approach them and say, that looks like a cool adventure, we want to go on it, and they do a little negotiation. Generally, the adventurers are poor, and so they are begging and negotiating with the museum teams to get the briefs and for them to pay their way, the logistics cost for the cool equipment to take with them. And then the adventurer team takes all that stuff back, they do some espionage, they do some research into objectives and other things, and then they go on a mini dungeon of sorts. So imagine a small role-playing game where you have a DM, you're going through some set event cards, and the DM runs you through those event cards, you roll some dice, you get through this adventure, there is a mini game at the end, and all being well, you walk away with some mystical artifact. And then the idea is that you take this mystical artifact and you give it back to the museums because, as we all know, it belongs in a museum.
Excellent. It is such a great game, especially from the player perspective. But as someone who has controlled it twice, it is quite the bear. Can you talk about how the event went at Gencon?
Yes. Let me talk about your comment there where you said it is a bear. It is the most complicated mega game that I have been a part of. Playing, running, organizing, controlling, all of the above. It is so content heavy. So a little background to it. Originally it was created by a few guys in the northeast of England, and then it was picked up by some Aussies, and then we heard about it from the Great Game podcast and thought that sounds amazing, and so I worked with the Brits to refine it further and try and organize it in a way that is possible to run. It is very, very complicated because every card has, there's over 2,000 cards to it, and every adventure, of which there are over 100 of them, has a very specific number of cards. There are different artifacts that you collect from going on those adventures. There are curse cards, there are boon cards, there are equipment cards, there are museum upgrade cards. And so making sure all those pieces of the puzzle fit together is so critical to making sure the event runs well. Not only that, maybe what's even more complicated is making sure that every single player has the opportunity to complete their objectives. So every single character in the game is unique, and they have very specific objectives. Some of them say things like, oh, go to Europe and do an adventure, and then go to Australasia and do an adventure. But some of them are more like, hey, you've got this gap in your memory. I wonder what it could be. And then you have to do some research and find out how to plug that gap in your memory. So as a control member, it's really, really important that you make sure that all your players have the opportunity to solve their objectives, and you have to run around the room making sure that they have access to the expeditions they want to go on, or they have a possibility of finding the artifact that they're looking for. And so all those things require a huge amount of organization. And from a player perspective, it runs really, really smoothly. You go to a museum, you get an expedition, you come back, you buy some things, you do a little espionage, you go on the expedition, and you're done. Like, it's pretty smooth as a player, but it's very control heavy, and it's very difficult to get those puzzle pieces fit together. For this particular event, this was the second time that we'd run it. We ran it in Louisville in June. It went pretty well in Louisville, and it went pretty well at Gencon. Definitely didn't go perfectly. You have a control team that you have trained up before you get there, but I don't know everyone as well as my control team at a local event. So there's something to be said about working through some of the cracks on the day with the control team at Gencon, which is, I guess, one of the differences between running at Gencon and running locally is you don't exactly know who your control team is until you get there. So the event did go very well. I had very, very positive stuff from most players. There's some lessons learned in there, but I'll pause on that just for a minute in case you've got any questions for me before I keep going.
Yeah, I think just in my experience controlling a game, like there's no such thing as too much control for this game. With 45 different players or whatever the number is, and each of them having a different story, it's just impossible to know all the different ins and outs of everyone. So the more hands you can have to deal out all those events for all the players is just better. It's such an amazing game from the player's perspective, and the stories that each individual one can get out of the game. It's incredible.
Yeah, we talked about preparing your control team and empowering your control team. And so, when I first met my control team via Discord, I said to them, hey, by the way, you guys have got some homework. And
to put it lightly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically what I was saying to them was every control member is in charge of up to 6 players, I think was the maximum. And so go away, learn those 6 objectives as well as you possibly can, and make sure that they all have the opportunity to succeed, because their game will live or die on how well that happens. Of course, there's all these like huge plots that happen as well, these huge big story beats, and so as sort of lead control, my job is to make sure that those things happen from a sort of 5,000-foot view by plugging all these small puzzle pieces together to make sure that these big story beats happen. For example, and I'm going to go into spoiler territory here, so if you want to play this or maybe don't listen to this, there is a moment when Atlantis rises. And as a control, we need to make sure that Atlantis rises at a particular part of the day, because some people's objectives rely on the expeditions that happen in Atlantis. So it can't happen too early, because then you're forcing it, and you really want the Atlantis to rise because of the players. But it can't happen too late, because you want the expeditions that happen at Atlantis to have the possibility that they actually happen. So you have to just sort of balance that really, really carefully. And one of the problems we had at Gencon was we just ran out of time. we've got 6 hours, and 6 hours sounds like a lot of time, but these expeditions are very lengthy, and we're trying to fit in a huge number of them. And so we just sort of run out of time. Our last few turns were very rushed, and that was probably the biggest negative from this game. The problem is, you've talked about this before, Forrest, about you cannot have enough control for some games, and this is one of them. Like, one control member looked after 2 explorer teams, and therefore that one control member has got to run each explorer team through an expedition. And the way we did it in Louisville is that person ran them both through at the same time. Well, that was hard work for a start, and it made some other issues elsewhere in the game, like the lines to the research table and the espionage table were very long because everyone was hitting it at the same time. So Gencon, we decided, well, let's split the main phase into 2, and then you have the control member who runs one expedition, and then they pack up really quickly and set up the next one, and then they run another expedition immediately following. Well, it sounds great in practice, but what it actually did is it gave us more failure points, because you need players to be in very specific locations at very specific times. And if they're off doing what mega gamers do best, which is mingling and causing chaos elsewhere in the game, they're not where they need to be when we're running the games, when we're running the expeditions, or when we want to begin them. And so we were constantly chasing players down to be in the right place at the right time. And so that was a real challenge from the day.
Yeah, big lesson learned there, I think. When you change one part of the game, how it impacts other parts of the game. And it seems to me, at least, that it belongs in a museum. Players really need to be in places in the game at specific times. In other mega games, you can fudge that a little bit, but not necessarily in this one. Do you agree with that? And are there any other lessons learned from Gen Con?
I mean, 100%. If you're playing something like Den of Wolves, you've got 2 phases. You've got a team time, and then you've got the action phase. And it doesn't really matter where players are in the action phase. Now, when the wolf attack happens, you do a big shout out for everyone to get to the military map so that they can fight off the wolves. But if they don't turn up, the wolves just win, So it's in their interest to get to that map to shoot the wolves down. But in Balrog's museum, they're doing cool things, and as a control member, you gotta keep moving, and if they're not there, you can't just skip it, because that part of the game is so integral to their overarching game experience. It's basically their whole game. It's the main part of the game for them. So you cannot just start without them, and you certainly cannot skip it. So if we were to run it again, I would have a serious think about the order in which we do things. Primarily resting with when players receive the briefs, because we didn't give them enough time at the beginning of each turn. What we would probably do next time is give out the briefs at the end of a current turn, which gives people more time to get their eyes on what they want to do, so that you're not chasing them up so much at the beginning of each turn, saying, "Where are you? Have you got your brief ready? Give it to control members so they can get things ready." So that would be the biggest change that we would make next time we run this one.
What are the best stories from the game? You talked a little bit about Atlantis Rising. Spoiler. I guess I should have said that first. Oops. But any other good stories from the day?
So many. I mean, the game is just so full of these amazing moments. And, I can't. This is going to be huge spoiler territory here, because you can't talk about the stories of the day without talking about people's individual story beats. Let me tell you one of the problems we began with. We accidentally let too many people into our game. So, and this game is real tight. If you've got too many people, it's like, what do they do? So on the fly, I had to create objectives for people very, very quickly. And I did that at the beginning of the game. We had too many people, and I came up with some objectives for them. One dude, I said, all right, you have to become immortal. And he's like, how do I do that? It's like, work it out. And so he ran off and sort of worked on that all game, and he had a great time doing it. And the other girl, I was like, okay, here's who you are. You are the Kurgan. And you have to go find Connor McLeod, and you have to fight to the death. And normally in a game, I would give out this Kurgan as a secondary objective to someone else that's already in the game. But it just worked out so nicely that we had this extra player, and it was just became her primary objective. And there's a guy in the game called Connor McLeod. His name's not exactly that to disguise his identity, but the idea is they find each other through the course of the game, and they have this big showdown. And when they got to the showdown, Connor McLeod was not prepared, so we gave him a disadvantage in the big duel. The Kurgan ended up winning, and it was just this amazing moment where everyone got to see the Kurgans announced, and it's brilliant. In fact, we say this is the second time we've run it. The Kurgan won in our first run as well, so it's
undefeated.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah. I'll take that, Connor.
That's right. Yeah.
I think you mentioned how tight this game is, and how too many players can throw things off. But I think you may also struggle with too few, because the roles intersect, in their stories so often. If you're missing one of those key players, they may not get their full story.
Absolutely. In fact, that happened in Louisville. We did not sell out. We were probably 8 tickets shy, which was basically 2 full teams, at least 2 full teams that we didn't have, and we lost 2 players whose primary objectives were to get Atlantis to rise. Therefore, as Control, we really had to force it. Now, force it sounds like a terrible word, like we just interjected ourselves into the game, but we really had to handhold the other people that were looking for Atlantis, because there were so few of them working on this sort of grand overarching scheme, because people were missing that would normally have done that. So yeah, definitely too few people is also tricky as well.
Let's see. What's the future of the game, do you think? Will you run it again? Is it packaged up? Can people buy it places? Do you know of anyone else who's running it?
It is pretty well packaged. That was one of the things that I gave back to the other Brits when I was running it and organizing it myself. I kind of gave them a whole bunch of cheat sheets and materials to help organize things and all that stuff. So I believe if you want to buy a copy of it, you probably need to reach out to those guys. They are part of True North Mega Games, I believe, in the UK, it's called. When will it be next run? Well, I've not heard tale of if it's going to be run again anywhere in the world in the near future. It may be, I just haven't heard of it. It should be. It's excellent. Will we run it again? I don't know. It's just so much work to organize and to get right. And I think if I were to run it again, I would have to have another serious look about trying to streamline some of this stuff. We have these special events at the end of each round where there's like an auction and there's an Explorers Club dinner where the explorers sort of boast about their exploits and that kind of stuff. And there's a research symposium, and I think if we were to play it again, I'd have to cut all of that out from the game just to focus on the stuff that really matters. And it's not to say that stuff doesn't matter. It's still fun for the players, but just to keep the game moving and on track. So I don't think so. It might be one of these things where in a few years I'm like, oh man, I really miss it. It was really good fun, and and so maybe. But right now, my answer is probably not.
All right. So coming 2026, It Belongs in a Museum round 2.
Well, also the thing is, like, by putting so much effort into It Belongs in a Museum for running it again, like at the end of next year or something, takes away from all the other cool stuff I want to do. Like, I'm a perpetual designer and organizer, right? And so there are so many great games out there that I want to run, I want to design, and I've got to make space for them. So it's hard to say yes to that one, which we've done and experienced, when there's something else on the horizon that might be equally fun.
Definitely. I think there's something to be said for also when you have a core group that plays every game. It's hard to get the same game back when they've already played it, especially something so story heavy and rigid as It Belongs in a Museum. Well, any final words about the future of the group, next games that you're looking to run? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, we mentioned this in the last segment, but the Dukes are running It Came From the Skies September 28th in Louisville, Kentucky, in North America. So if you're within like a 6-hour drive, you should definitely come to that. As of the end of August, there are still half the tickets available. And then we'll have a whole slate of games next year. I don't know what those are yet. We haven't got that far, but there might be a new design in there. Who knows? We'll just have to watch this space.
Oh, excellent. Well, thanks, Tony. It was great hearing about Gen Con.
Thank you, Forrest. I appreciate it.